Hello, good morning. We are back on Friday with Fridays with Frank. And before we bring Frank on, please remember to like and subscribe and comment if you have any questions. Please feel free to comment. We'll consider your questions and maybe you come with us on a future episode. But Frank, I think I know what's on your mind today. So tell us who our special guest is, please.
Oh, thank you, Mark. Yes, we've had an interesting experience. We attended a press conference which KM kicked off their new dealer contract, which we fundamentally believe very solidly was a good approach for major accounts, because I cited a case early on in the business that manufacturers weren't very helpful when dealers sold enterprise accounts. Getting dealers to service the machines was a real issue. They indicated in the press conference that Bob Goldberg had given his blessings to the contract, and I wanted to get his reading. So please join me in welcoming our dear friend Bob Goldberg.
Thank you, Frank, and always wonderful to see you. Glad to be a participant, and I welcome the opportunity because there's been a great deal of inconsistent information given about the new Konica Minolta agreement. I've received dozens of phone calls, but I think the best way to analyze this new agreement is to look at the history of the agreements in our industry. As you well remember, back in the days of the 80s and 90s, we had contracts that were presented to dealers that were extremely one-sided. Dealers had basically no rights. Manufacturers were coming out with equipment that had yet to be fully tested. Dealers were being plagued with retrofit kits they had to install without compensation, and it was a nightmare. Back in those days, the National Office Machine Dealers Association had two committees that addressed it. We had the Manufacturer Dealer Relations Committee and the Government Relations Committee. And what the Manufacturer Dealer Relations Committee formulated were four very important, critical, basic elements for an agreement between a manufacturer and a dealer. And those were, number one, an open-ended term, that the agreement automatically renewed without renegotiation on an annual basis. And this was deemed necessary because often the manufacturer would get a quota from Japan that raised the U.S. Requirements 10%, and in turn, the dealers will raise 20%. There was no real basis for the increase, and thus the association developed the Business Equipment Quota Index, which gave some real meaning to what proper quotas would be. The second was that there would be arbitration or mediation of any disputes that came about. This was another important thing because legal matters are extremely expensive, and it was important that there'd be an alternative dispute resolution meeting. There also was a requirement that quotas be mutually agreed upon, so that they couldn't be arbitrary and capricious. And finally, the basic foundation of every agreement was that the dealer and the manufacturer would treat each other throughout the term of the agreement and in terminating the agreement in a fair, equitable, and ethical manner. And we negotiated that with manufacturers and were successful in getting it involved in many approved contracts. Well, we didn't, early on in the 80s and 90s, it was a difficult task. So the Government Relations Committee went to Congress. We introduced the Fair Dealership Practices Act, and for 2 years had it working through the House of Representatives and the Senate to have it raised, to have fair and equitable agreements in our industry. Eventually, there was a council created by IBM at the time, which was interesting, and all manufacturers participated, and we came about with a statement of principles. So the point being made that we've come a tremendous way. There's no question, Frank, dealers don't like change. A new agreement raises questions. And there were statements made about this agreement that were made without the benefit of having the agreement before them. So I have the agreement. I've looked at it. We spent weeks on it. And we've made some substantial improvements to the relationship between Konica Minolta and its dealer channel. I I commend Laura and Sam for having me work with their counsel for at least 4 or 5 weeks on this agreement. I can start with confidential information. It now includes financial information, sales information, and end user information. Those are always critical points to the dealer network. We also, you'll see throughout the agreement when the dealers receive it, um, instead of sole and absolute discretion, it's reasonable belief, reasonable discretion that they'll find. Um, Reasonable, you'll find throughout the agreement. I'm looking at paragraph 4, it's there. There's a message for the dealers, and I'm glad, Frank, you're giving them this opportunity. In the paragraph that they have, 5C, Konica Minolta disclaims any warranties for any third-party software products. Basically, they say, look to the developer, not to us for any claims. And it's important the dealers mirror that type of language in their own transactional documents, and the Business Technology Association makes that available. There's also in 5E a provision that neither party are using any third-party information. Now, what does that mean? There was always concerns by the dealer channel that some of their competitor information might be getting to another party, and this assures that that won't happen.